so that we could stay one happy family.
Said to me,
Ma'am, you don't look so good, Mom. You'd be a good mom someday, honey pie. Mom?
Mommy's with the maggots now.
what will be.
Evil Dead Rise presents a complete analysis and explanation of its narrative structure, beginning with the cold open that immediately establishes the rules of this universe. The film opens on a lakeside cabin, a deliberate misdirect for longtime fans of the franchise, where a seemingly normal vacation among friends turns violently wrong. This analysis reveals how the opening sequence functions as a thesis statement, showing Jessica's possession, the scalping of Teresa, and the decapitation of Caleb before the title card even appears, thereby announcing that this iteration will be merciless and swift in its brutality. The narrative structure begins with the cold open, which immediately establishes the rules of this universe. The story opens on a lakeside cabin, a deliberate misdirect for longtime fans of the franchise, where a seemingly normal vacation among friends turns violently wrong. This opening sequence functions as a thesis statement, showing Jessica's possession, the scalping of Teresa, and the decapitation of Caleb before the title card even appears, thereby announcing that this iteration will be merciless and swift in its brutality. The structural timeline proves critical to understanding the narrative. The story shifts to one day earlier, placing the majority of the film as a prequel to the cabin massacre just witnessed. This temporal shift is not a gimmick. It is a narrative device that recontextualizes the entire film. By the end, it becomes clear that the evil was never contained to the cabin, and the events seen in the prologue are a direct consequence of the failure to stop the entity in the high-rise, making the opening a grim epilogue rather than an unrelated prologue. The protagonist, Beth, receives an introduction that immediately subverts traditional horror expectations. Beth is a guitar technician on tour, and her discovery of an unplanned pregnancy frames her entire character arc. Her visit to her sister Ellie is not just a familial stopover. It is a desperate search for guidance. She begins the film terrified of motherhood, viewing the life growing inside her as a threat to her independence, which makes her final transformation into a fierce, protective maternal figure the emotional core of the film. The central family unit, the Bixlers, is presented with careful attention to their precarity. Ellie, the eldest sister, is a single mother and tattoo artist living in the dilapidated Mond Apartments, a soon-to-be-demolished high-rise in Los Angeles. The family is already in a state of economic instability, the absence of fathers, and the looming eviction. The decaying building is a physical manifestation of their social and emotional decay, a pressure cooker ready to explode even before the supernatural element is introduced. The setting, a condemned high-rise building, fundamentally changes the franchise's geography. Moving from the iconic remote cabin to a densely populated urban center seems to contradict the isolation necessary for horror. However, the inversion of this expectation is brilliant. The earthquake that cracks the foundation and collapses the stairwell transforms the building into a vertical coffin. They are surrounded by thousands of people, yet utterly alone. Help is literally on the other side of the wall, but they are trapped on a failing floor, isolated by modern urban decay rather than rural distance. The earthquake serves as the inciting incident and a clever piece of narrative engineering. It is not merely a random natural disaster, but the awakening of something ancient and buried. The cracking open of the parking garage floor exposes a hidden vault beneath the bank that once occupied the ground floor, a secret chamber filled with religious artifacts and forbidden knowledge. This geological rupture symbolizes the breaking of a seal between the rational modern world and the primordial evil waiting beneath it, a literal descent into hell accessible through a collapsed concrete floor. Danny, the eldest child, functions as the catalyst for the horror through his curiosity and his role as a DJ. He discovers the hidden vault and, more importantly, the 3 vinyl records dated 1923 alongside the flesh-bound Naturam Demontu, the franchise's iconic Necronomicon. His decision to take the records and the book upstairs, to treat them as curious artifacts rather than dangerous warnings, speaks to a generation's disconnect from ancient terrors. He treats the occult with the same casual interest as a rare vinyl find, a fatal mistake. The vinyl records represent a brilliant modernization of the franchise's traditional audio recording trope. In the original films, a tape recorder played the incantations. Here, the crackling recordings of a priest from 1923 serve the same function, but with added texture. The ritualistic scratching of the needle on vinyl, the warmth of the analog recording, and the scholarly yet terrified voice of the priest create an atmosphere of unearthed dread. The records are not just exposition. They are cursed objects in their own right, preserving a voice that should have been silenced forever. The incantation scene is a masterclass in building dread through sound design. As Danny plays the record, the priest's voice recites words that should never be spoken aloud. The camera lingers on the spinning vinyl, the vibrations of the needle translating ancient syllables into physical sound waves that ripple through the building. The power flickers and fails, the elevator stalls, and the boundary between worlds thins. The incantation does not summon a demon from elsewhere. It awakens something already present, dormant, waiting in the walls and the foundation. Ellie's possession occurs off-screen and in a confined space, making it uniquely terrifying. Trapped in the stalled elevator, alone and vulnerable, she is assaulted by an invisible force. The analysis of this scene reveals its cruelty. The evil targets the matriarch, the center of the family, knowing that her corruption will cause maximum psychological damage. When the elevator doors open, the thing that steps out wears Ellie's face, but carries something ancient and hungry behind its eyes, a perversion of the familiar that is the hallmark of this franchise. Alyssa Sutherland's performance as Ellie the Deadite deserves extensive analysis as one of the great horror villains of recent cinema. She is towering, skeletal, and insect-like in her movements, her limbs seemingly too long, her joints bending in subtly wrong directions. Yet she retains Ellie's memories, her voice, and her intimate knowledge of her children's fears. Sutherland walks a razor-thin line between monstrous and tragic, her dead eyes occasionally flickering with something that might be the real Ellie, trapped and screaming inside her own body, forced to watch herself terrorize her children. The apartment hallway massacre is choreographed with balletic precision and savagery. Viewed through the fisheye peephole, the scene forces the audience into Beth's perspective as a helpless witness. Ellie dispatches the neighboring residents with brutal efficiency, using her elongated limbs and inhuman strength to crack bones, tear flesh, and paint the walls with blood. The peephole distorts the image, making the violence surreal and nightmarish, a single unbroken shot that announces that this Deadite is faster, smarter, and more cruel than any seen before in the franchise. The weaponization of household objects is a deliberate thematic choice that grounds the horror in domestic reality. The cheese grater becomes an instrument of flaying. The tattoo gun becomes a tool for inscribing pain. Scissors, broken glass, kitchen knives, all the mundane artifacts of family life are transformed into implements of torture. This is the evil invading the home, turning the familiar and the safe into sources of unimaginable suffering. The message is clear. There is no sanctuary, no place so ordinary that it cannot become a slaughterhouse. Bridget's possession is a slow, agonizing process that highlights the biological horror of the franchise. She is infected through a wound, a small cut that becomes a portal for the demonic force. The analysis of her transformation shows the body rebelling against itself, the skin stretching, the voice distorting, the personality eroding. Her pleading with her family while the thing takes control is heartbreaking, a child begging for help that cannot be given. The moment young Cassie is forced to impale her own sister through the head with a broom handle is a devastating loss of innocence that the film does not flinch from depicting. Cassie emerges as the emotional anchor and moral compass of the film. As the youngest child, she represents innocence and vulnerability, yet she is also the most perceptive. Her creation of a protective staff, which she names Staphany and decorates with a doll head, is both a child's coping mechanism and a genuine weapon of defense. The analysis reveals that Cassie's journey mirrors Beth's. Both are thrust into roles they are not ready for. Both must find the strength to survive against impossible odds, and both ultimately choose to protect each other in a world where their biological mothers have become monsters. The third vinyl record contains the film's cruelest revelation. There is no exorcism, no ritual of purification, no way to save the possessed. The priest who made the recordings in 1923 tried everything, and he failed. The only solution is total bodily destruction. This information reframes the entire conflict. The family has been holding on to hope that Ellie can be saved, that the real Ellie still exists somewhere inside the creature. The record extinguishes that hope completely and forces a brutal calculus. To survive, they must annihilate the bodies of the people they love. The thematic core of the film is motherhood transformed into horror. Director Lee Cronin explicitly constructed the narrative around maternal fears, not as a subtext but as the text itself. Ellie, the nurturing mother, becomes the devouring mother. She sings lullabies with a mouth full of blood, offers comfort with hands designed to tear, and uses her children's names as weapons. The film taps into the primal terror of the caregiver becoming the threat, the one person who is supposed to protect you unconditionally becoming the source of your annihilation. Beth's pregnancy operates as a counterpoint to Ellie's monstrous maternity. Initially, Beth views her unborn child as an inconvenience, a mistake that threatens her career and her freedom. The analysis traces her arc from reluctant carrier to fierce protector, culminating in her decision to fight for her life and the life of her baby. The moment she declares, "I'm keeping it," is a turning point, an acceptance of motherhood not as passive condition, but as active choice and identity. This thematic parallel between the two sisters, the corrupted mother and the awakening mother, forms the emotional skeleton of the film. Ellie's attempt to extract Beth's fetus is the film's most transgressive and disturbing sequence. The kitchen becomes an operating theater of horror. Ellie, speaking in the grotesque parody of a midwife's soothing tones, advances with a pair of scissors. The analysis of this scene reveals its multiple layers of violation. The invasion of bodily autonomy, the perversion of childbirth, the sister-turned obstetrician of death. Beth fights back with everything she has, protecting not just herself but the potential life within her, a battle that literalizes the film's theme of maternal survival. Danny's death marks the collapse of the family unit and the extinguishing of guilt-driven hope. Throughout the film, Danny carries the weight of responsibility for unleashing the evil. His final act of setting the reanimated Bridget on fire is both a desperate attempt at redemption and a horrific necessity. He dies knowing that his curiosity killed his family, a tragic arc that offers no comfort or absolution, only the cold reality that some mistakes cannot be undone and some doors, once opened, can never be closed. The Marauder, the fused entity created from the bodies of Ellie, Danny, and the reanimated Bridget, represents the ultimate perversion of family unity. Where the family was once separate individuals with distinct relationships, they are now a single, writhing mass of limbs, heads, and teeth. The creature is a grotesque mockery of togetherness, a family that can never be separated because they have been physically merged into one nightmare organism. The practical effects used to create the Marauder are a triumph of old-school horror craftsmanship, a tangle of bodies that moves with impossible, spider-like coordination. The elevator shaft becomes a vertical blood ocean in one of the film's most visually striking sequences. As Beth and Cassie attempt to escape, the elevator floods with blood, a direct homage to The Shining, but amplified to franchise-appropriate levels of excess. The blood is not just a visual, it is a physical obstacle, a drowning threat, a baptism of gore. The analysis reveals that this sequence represents a descent, a journey downward toward the parking garage that mirrors a descent into the underworld, with each floor passed marking a deeper level of hell. The woodchipper finale delivers the film's ultimate statement on the necessity of total destruction. Beth, cornered in the parking garage with Cassie, uses the industrial machine as her weapon. The sequence is both brutal and cathartic, the grinding blades serving as the only force capable of reducing the Marauder to pieces small enough that they cannot reanimate. When Beth kicks Ellie's severed head into the blades, the act is not just violence. It is the final severing of family bonds, the necessary killing of the monstrous mother so that the surrogate mother can live. The chainsaw and shotgun of the original films are absent, replaced by the woodchipper and improvised weapons. This change is significant for the analysis of the film's relationship to the franchise. The traditional weapons are associated with Ash, the masculine hero fighting against the evil. The woodchipper, a machine of absolute grinding destruction, fits the film's theme of maternal violence. It does not cut cleanly. It pulverizes, it obliterates, it reduces to unrecognizable mulch. It is the only weapon capable of ending a threat that regenerates, a final solution that leaves nothing behind to rise again. The bond between Beth and Cassie forms the emotional resolution of the film. They are not mother and daughter by blood, but they become family through shared trauma and mutual protection. Cassie, who lost her biological mother to the evil, and Beth, who nearly lost her unborn child, find in each other a reason to keep fighting. The analysis shows that this found family dynamic is the film's answer to the corrupted family unit. Family can be rebuilt, redefined, and reforged in the crucible of survival. The post-credits scene returns to the cabin from the prologue, providing the crucial narrative link that completes the circle. Jessica, who survived the initial massacre at the cabin, is shown preparing to leave the parking garage of the Mond Apartments for her vacation. She is attacked by an unseen force, confirming that the evil was never contained to the high-rise. The analysis reveals the grim implication. The demonic entity has spread, using the apartment building as a new vector of infection, and the events at the cabin are not a prequel but a continuation, an endless chain of suffering. The urban isolation of the film deserves deeper analysis as a subversion of horror conventions. Traditional horror relies on rural isolation. The cabin in the woods where no one can hear you scream. The high-rise setting in the middle of Los Angeles offers the opposite condition. Thousands of people live within shouting distance, yet the collapsed infrastructure, the apathy of city life, and the thin walls that somehow keep secrets create a different kind of isolation. The film argues that modern urban existence is its own form of loneliness, where neighbors are strangers and help is never coming because no one wants to get involved. The sound design of the film is a character in its own right, weaving a tapestry of auditory dread that begins with the vinyl records and extends through every scene. The crackle of the needle, the subsonic rumbles of the earthquake, the wet tearing sounds of possession, and the distorted lullabies that Ellie sings all contribute to an atmosphere of inescapable menace. The analysis notes that the film rewards attentive listening. Subtle audio cues foreshadow violence, and the absence of sound is used strategically to heighten the impact of sudden, brutal noise. The cinematography employs a dynamic, intrusive camera that refuses to look away from the horror. The peephole sequence, the slow tracking shots through blood-slicked hallways, and the vertiginous angles of the elevator shaft all contribute to a visual language that is both claustrophobic and expansive. The camera moves like a predatory animal, stalking the characters, cornering them in tight spaces, and occasionally adopting the perspective of the evil itself, gliding through vents and under doors with malevolent curiosity. The color palette shifts dramatically over the course of the film, beginning with the warm, natural tones of the lakeside cabin and the slightly grimy, but lived-in hues of the apartment. As the evil takes hold, the colors drain toward a sickly green and arterial red, the fluorescent lights of the hallway flickering with dying electricity. By the final act, the parking garage is bathed in cold industrial light and deep shadow, a visual descent into a world drained of warmth and life. The film's relationship to the broader franchise is one of respectful reinvention. It does not feature Bruce Campbell as Ash, nor does it directly reference the 2013 reboot. It exists in the same universe, governed by the same rules, haunted by the same Necronomicon, but it tells its own story with its own visual and thematic identity. The analysis shows that this approach allows the film to stand alone while still satisfying longtime fans who recognize the rhythms, the iconography, and the relentless brutality that defines the series. The performance of Lily Sullivan as Beth anchors the film's emotional reality. She begins as a reluctant, somewhat self-absorbed young woman who has not yet figured out her life. Her pregnancy is an interruption, an inconvenience. Over the course of the film, she is forged into a survivor, a protector, and ultimately a mother in the truest sense. Sullivan's physical performance is demanding, requiring her to fight, bleed, and push her body to its limits, but it is the quiet moments of decision, the hardening of her eyes when she chooses to fight, that define the character. The practical effects deserve extended analysis as a statement of artistic intent in an era dominated by digital effects. The Marauder creature is a practical construction, a physical suit and puppetry that required multiple performers to operate. The blood is real liquid, gallons of it, flooding sets and drenching actors. The gore gags, from the cheese grater to the tattoo gun to the wood chipper, are achieved through prosthetics, squibs, and old-fashioned ingenuity. This commitment to practical horror gives the film a tactile, weighty quality that CGI cannot replicate. The film's humor, while subdued compared to the slapstick excess of Evil Dead 2, is present in the dark ironies and absurdist escalations of violence. The fact that a cheese grater becomes a weapon of terror, that a wood chipper is the salvation, that a child's handmade staff with a doll head becomes a genuine defensive tool, all contain a grim comedic sensibility. The analysis reveals that this humor is not relief from the horror, but an intensification of it, the laughter catching in the throat as the violence escalates beyond the bounds of good taste. The religious imagery in the film is both explicit and subverted. The priest on the vinyl records is a figure of failed faith, a man of God who could not stop the evil and whose recorded warnings only serve to spread it. The crucifix, the vault beneath the bank, the ritualistic language of the incantation, all invoke Catholic horror traditions, but they offer no protection. The film presents a universe where religious symbols are merely historical artifacts, powerless against the ancient force they were designed to contain. The body horror elements of the film tap into deep anxieties about physical transformation and loss of self. The possessed bodies stretch, crack, and reconfigure themselves in ways that violate anatomical possibility. Eyes roll back, mouths stretch too wide, limbs bend at impossible angles. This analysis of the body horror reveals its thematic connection to pregnancy and motherhood. The body becoming foreign, the self displaced by an invading presence, the horror of something growing inside you that you cannot control. The film's pacing is relentless after the initial setup, a compression of time and space that mirrors the characters' shrinking options. The apartment becomes smaller as rooms are lost to the enemy. The time between attacks shortens. The survivors dwindle. This acceleration creates a sense of inevitability, a countdown to a final confrontation that cannot be avoided, only survived or not. The analysis notes that the film respects the audience's endurance, pushing to the edge of excess without tipping into numbing repetition. The supporting characters, while given limited screen time before their deaths, serve specific narrative functions that enrich the analysis. The neighbors in the hallway represent the ordinary world, oblivious to the supernatural horror until it is literally at their throats. Their swift, brutal dispatch by Ellie establishes the stakes and the power of the enemy. They are not characters so much as warnings, demonstrations of what happens when the evil is not taken seriously. The mythology of the Necronomicon is expanded through the vinyl records and the hidden vault. The book is not merely a tome of spells, but a living document, bound in human flesh, illustrated with diagrams of suffering. The priest's recordings reveal that the book has a history, that it was studied and fought against by people who ultimately failed. This expansion of lore adds depth without over-explaining, maintaining the mystery of the evil while suggesting a larger world of occult history beneath the surface. The film's ending offers a complicated form of hope. Beth and Cassie survive, and Beth's pregnancy continues, but they have been fundamentally changed by their experience. The world they knew has been shattered, replaced by a reality where demons are real, where family can turn monstrous, and where survival requires unspeakable actions. The analysis suggests that this is not a happy ending, but a scarred one, a hard-won continuation in a universe that remains hostile and hungry. The social commentary embedded in the film addresses economic precarity, urban decay, and the failure of institutional support. The Mond apartments are being demolished, displacing families who have nowhere else to go. The building's management is absent. The police never arrive. The family is left to fend for itself in a system that has already abandoned them before the supernatural horror begins. This layer of realism grounds the fantasy in recognizable social anxiety. The film's place in the horror canon is still being determined, but early analysis suggests it will be remembered as a successful reinvention of a classic franchise. It honors the legacy of Sam Raimi's original vision while confidently charting its own course. The move to the city, the focus on maternal horror, and the commitment to practical effects all contribute to a film that feels both timeless and contemporary, a worthy addition to a series that has always pushed boundaries. The directorial vision of Lee Cronin merits analysis as the unifying force behind the film's disparate elements. Cronin brings his Irish horror sensibility, honed on the hole in the ground, to an American setting and a storied franchise. His control of tone, his willingness to commit to extreme imagery, and his focus on character amid chaos elevate the film above mere imitation. He understands that the scariest things in the world are not demons but the people we love turning against us, a truth that resonates long after the blood has dried. The score by Stephen McKeon integrates the traditional horror orchestration with the diegetic sounds of the vinyl records and the industrial noise of the building. The music does not merely accompany the action. It is woven into the soundscape, blurring the line between soundtrack and environment. The analysis reveals how the score amplifies the emotional beats, the moments of grief and terror, without overwhelming the more intimate scenes of character development. The production design transforms the apartment into a character with its own arc. It begins as a slightly messy but functional family home, filled with Ellie's tattoo art, the children's belongings, and the clutter of daily life. As the film progresses, it becomes a war zone, a slaughterhouse, and finally a tomb. The destruction of the domestic space mirrors the destruction of the family, each broken wall and blood-spattered surface a testament to the violence that has consumed everything. The film's dialogue is economical, revealing character and advancing plot with minimal exposition. The children speak like real children, with their own shorthand and shared history. Ellie's Deadite taunts are poetic and cruel, using intimate knowledge to wound psychologically as well as physically. Beth's evolution is tracked through her speech, from uncertain questions to declarative statements of intent. The analysis notes that the script trusts the audience to follow without hand-holding, a respect that elevates the entire experience. The franchise's signature splatstick tradition, the blend of extreme gore with dark physical comedy, is present but evolved in this iteration. The Three Stooges influence that Raimi cited for his original films is less overt, replaced by a more savage irony. The humor comes from the escalation, the audacity of the violence, the sheer excess of a blood flood or a woodchipper finale. It is comedy as coping mechanism, the nervous laughter of an audience pushed past its comfort zone. The film's treatment of death is unflinching and democratic. No character is safe, no death is dignified, and the evil does not discriminate. Children die brutally. Mothers become monsters. The innocent and the guilty suffer equally. This nihilistic approach to mortality is a core tenet of the franchise, and the analysis shows that the film upholds it without compromise, refusing to offer the comfort of narrative protection to any character. The visual effects that supplement the practical work are used judiciously and effectively. The levitation of the Deadites, the distortion of faces, and the environmental destruction that the earthquake causes are enhanced by digital effects that blend seamlessly with the physical performances and sets. The analysis credits the filmmakers for knowing when to use CGI as a tool rather than a crutch, preserving the tangible reality of the horror while expanding the possibilities of what can be shown. The film's engagement with the theme of guilt is personified in Danny, whose actions unleash the evil, but it extends to Beth as well. Beth carries guilt for her estrangement from Ellie, for her reluctance to embrace motherhood, and for her inability to save her family. The analysis reveals that guilt is as corrosive as any demon, eating away at the characters from the inside, and that survival requires not just physical escape, but the psychological strength to carry the weight of what has been lost. The ritual elements of the film, the incantations in the book, connect to a long tradition of folk horror and occult cinema. The evil is not scientific or extraterrestrial. It is ancient, magical, and governed by rules that predate human civilization. This grounding in the supernatural gives the horror a mythic quality, a sense that the characters are not fighting a monster, but a fundamental force of the universe, as indifferent and unstoppable as gravity. The film's reception by audiences and critics confirmed its success as both a franchise entry and a standalone horror film. Strong box office returns demonstrated the commercial viability of the series without its original star. Critical praise focused on the performances, the practical effects, and the boldness of the maternal horror theme. The analysis concludes that the film achieved its goals, revitalizing the franchise for a new generation while satisfying the bloodlust of the existing fanbase. The legacy of the film will likely be defined by its central image. The mother as monster, the family as food, the home as hell. This inversion of the most fundamental human bonds gives the horror a staying power that goes beyond jump scares and gore. It taps into something primal and uncomfortable, the knowledge that the people we love most are the ones who can hurt us most deeply, and that the safest place in the world can become the most dangerous overnight. The elevator, a recurring motif throughout the film, functions as a liminal space between safety and danger, life and death. It is where Ellie is possessed, where Beth and Cassie nearly drown in blood, and where the vertical journey between floors becomes a metaphor for descent into the underworld. The analysis of the elevator reveals its symbolic weight. It is a modern chariot to hell, a metal box that should provide transport but instead delivers only terror. The final image of Beth and Cassie walking away from the carnage, blood-soaked and traumatized but alive, is the closest the film comes to a traditional resolution. They have escaped the building, escaped the marauder, and escaped immediate death. But the post-credits scene undermines any sense of closure, reminding the audience that the evil is not defeated, only displaced. The analysis ends on this note of lingering dread, the understanding that in this universe, the horror never truly ends. It only moves on to the next victim, the next family, the next home. The earthquake that opens the main narrative operates as more than a geological event. It is a narrative key that unlocks the buried history of the building's former life as a bank. The cracking concrete reveals not just a hidden vault, but a suppressed past, a secret that the modern world has literally paved over. The tremors represent a rupture in the thin membrane separating civilization from the chaos that predates it, a reminder that the ground beneath our feet is never as solid as we believe. This analysis reveals how the earthquake externalizes the internal instability of the family, shaking apart the fragile structures they have built to contain their own pain and secrets, leaving them exposed to an ancient hunger that has waited patiently in the dark. Ellie's work as a tattoo artist provides a rich vein of thematic material that the film explores with gruesome creativity. Tattooing is the art of piercing skin to create permanent images, a controlled form of bodily violation that Ellie practices as her profession. When she becomes a Deadite, this skill is perverted into torture, the tattoo gun becoming a weapon that inscribes suffering rather than art. The analysis of this inversion reveals the film's preoccupation with the vulnerability of the body, the thinness of the barrier between self and world, and the ease with which acts of creation can be twisted into acts of destruction by a malevolent will. The absence of fathers in the film is a deliberate structural choice that shapes every character dynamic. Ellie's husband has left, presumably after a messy divorce, leaving her to raise 3 children alone in a building slated for demolition. Beth's pregnancy is the result of a one-night stand with a man she has no intention of involving in the child's life. The analysis shows that this absence of patriarchal protection is not a weakness, but a condition of the world the film depicts, a world where women must face horrors without masculine rescue, where the traditional family structure has already collapsed before the demonic invasion begins, and where survival depends on feminine strength alone. The sound of the vinyl record spinning after the music has stopped creates an atmosphere of anticipatory dread that permeates the early scenes. The repetitive click of the needle in the run-out groove is a sonic metaphor for a world stuck in a loop of approaching doom, a mechanical heartbeat counting down to catastrophe. This sound design choice connects the modern setting to the analog horror of the past, bridging the gap between the 1923 recording and the present-day characters. The analysis suggests that this attention to auditory detail is one of the film's greatest strengths, creating a texture of unease that operates below the level of conscious perception. unsettling the viewer before any violence occurs. The relationship between Danny and Bridget, the two teenage siblings, is sketched with economic precision that makes their eventual fates more devastating. They are typical adolescents, bickering over trivialities, navigating the awkwardness of their changing bodies and social identities, and united by their shared resentment of their younger sister Cassie's favored status. The analysis reveals that their normalcy is essential to the horror. They are not archetypes, but recognizable young people whose lives have barely begun. When Bridget is possessed and Danny is forced to burn her, the tragedy is amplified by the authenticity of their earlier interactions, the wasted potential of two lives extinguished before they could fully form. The architectural layout of the apartment becomes a strategic map that the characters must navigate like a military campaign. The kitchen, the bedrooms, the bathroom, and the living room each become contested territory, lost and retaken over the course of the siege. The ventilation system, intended to circulate air, becomes a highway for the enemy, a network of passages through which the Deadite can travel unseen. The analysis examines how the film transforms domestic space into a battlefield, forcing the characters to reconsider every corner of their home as a potential threat, every familiar room as a trap waiting to spring. The religious artifacts discovered in the vault alongside the Necronomicon include crucifixes, rosaries, and other objects of Catholic devotion, all of which prove useless against the demonic force. This is not accidental, but a pointed theological statement embedded in the franchise's mythology. The evil in this universe is not satanic in the traditional sense. It is older, stranger, and indifferent to the symbols of organized religion. The analysis shows how the film strips away the conventional protections of horror cinema, leaving its characters without the comfort of faith, armed only with their will to survive and whatever improvised weapons they can find. The flickering fluorescent lights of the apartment hallway create a visual language of instability and decay that mirrors the psychological state of the characters. These lights do not simply fail. They strobe, they pulse, they cast shadows that move independently of their sources. The analysis of the lighting design reveals a deliberate strategy to make the environment itself seem hostile, a space where the boundary between the physical and the supernatural has been compromised. The unreliable light sources prevent the eye from settling, keeping the audience in a state of perpetual visual uncertainty that primes them for the horrors to come. Beth's profession as a guitar technician is not an arbitrary biographical detail, but a skill that proves crucial to her survival. Her hands are trained to work with precision under pressure, to repair broken things, to understand the mechanics of tension and release. The analysis traces how this technical background informs her approach to problem-solving during the siege, from rigging defenses to operating unfamiliar machinery. Her competence is not superhuman but earned through years of practice, a quiet feminist statement about the value of female expertise in a genre that has traditionally undervalued it. The Deadites' use of Ellie's memories to torment her children represents a form of psychological warfare that elevates the horror beyond mere physical threat. It sings lullabies that Ellie once sang, calls the children by pet names only she used, and exploits vulnerabilities that only a mother would know. This analysis reveals the cruelty inherent in the demonic strategy. It does not simply want to kill the family, but to destroy their sense of safety, to corrupt their most cherished memories, and to make them complicit in their own destruction by weaponizing their love for their mother against them. The third vinyl record's revelation that the priest failed in 1923 introduces a theme of institutional collapse that resonates throughout the film. The church could not contain the evil. The bank vault could not secure it. The modern apartment building cannot withstand it. The analysis connects these failures to a broader critique of the institutions that society trusts to protect it, suggesting that the film's true horror lies not in the supernatural, but in the recognition that the structures we build to keep ourselves safe are fundamentally inadequate, that safety is an illusion maintained by willful ignorance. The cheese grater scene deserves a dedicated analysis as one of the most visceral and difficult-to-watch sequences in modern horror. The choice of a mundane kitchen implement as an instrument of torture is not merely gratuitous, but thematically coherent, a continuation of the film's project to make the domestic sphere a site of terror. The sound design of this moment, the wet, scraping noise of metal against flesh, is almost unbearable, forcing the audience into a position of helpless witness. The analysis notes that the scene works because it is brief, suggestive rather than exhaustive, leaving the worst to the imagination while showing just enough to sear itself into memory. Cassie's Staphany, the broom handle topped with a doll's head that she carries throughout the film, functions on multiple symbolic levels simultaneously. It is a child's toy, a security object that helps her process the incomprehensible horror engulfing her family. It is a weapon, the same staff she uses to impale her possessed sister. It is a fetish, an object imbued with protective power through the intensity of her belief in it. The analysis reveals that Staphany represents the thin line between innocence and violence, a reminder that children adapt to nightmare with resources that adults have forgotten, transforming play into survival with seamless fluidity. The film's approach to geography, the verticality of the high-rise versus the horizontality of the traditional cabin setting, creates a different kind of spatial horror. In a cabin, the threat comes from outside, from the woods, and the characters must defend a perimeter. In the high-rise, the threat comes from within, from the elevator shaft, the vents, the apartment next door. The analysis shows that this vertical orientation changes the nature of the siege, eliminating the possibility of escape through flight and forcing a confrontation with an enemy that has already breached the walls. The color red dominates the film's visual palette to an extent that borders on the oppressive, from the deep crimson of the Necronomicon's flesh binding to the arterial spray that coats every surface by the final act. This saturation of red is not merely representational but psychological, a visual assault that wears down the audience's defenses. The analysis reveals that the film uses color as a narrative tool, the increasing dominance of red tracking the progress of the evil as it spreads from the vault to the elevator to the apartment and finally to the parking garage, painting the world in shades of violence. The performance of Morgan Davies as Danny captures the specific agony of adolescent guilt with devastating precision. Danny is old enough to understand the consequences of his actions, but not mature enough to have anticipated them, and his arc from curious teenager to traumatized survivor to sacrificial victim is etched in every line of Davies' face. The analysis focuses on the moment Danny realizes he has doomed his family, a silent reaction shot that communicates more than any dialogue could, the weight of irreversible error settling onto shoulders too young to bear it. The film's relationship to the 2013 reboot is one of spiritual kinship rather than narrative continuity, sharing a commitment to unrelenting intensity while diverging in setting and theme. The 2013 film used addiction as its metaphorical framework, with Mia's withdrawal and possession intertwined. This film uses motherhood, creating a different resonance while maintaining the franchise's tradition of grounding supernatural horror in real-world suffering. The analysis suggests that this thematic flexibility is key to the franchise's longevity, allowing each installment to speak to contemporary anxieties while remaining true to the core mythology. The Marauder's design, a fusion of multiple bodies into a single, insectoid organism, draws on traditions of body horror that stretch back to Cronenberg and beyond. The creature is a violation of individuality, a physical manifestation of the loss of self that possession represents. The analysis of its movement patterns reveals a disturbing intelligence beneath the chaos, a coordinated purpose that suggests the individual consciousnesses of Ellie, Danny, and Bridget have not been erased but subsumed into a collective nightmare, their bodies repurposed for a singular, malevolent will. The brief appearance of the building's other residents before their massacre serves to establish a sense of community that is immediately and brutally extinguished. The neighbors are not developed as characters, but their presence suggests a network of relationships, a social fabric that the demonic invasion shreds without hesitation. The analysis notes that this rapid elimination of the supporting cast is a deliberate narrative choice, isolating the core family and removing any possibility of outside intervention, narrowing the focus to the intimate horror of a family consuming itself. The film's use of silence is as important as its use of sound, creating rhythmic patterns of tension and release that control the audience's nervous system. Moments of quiet, the stillness before attack, are stretched to breaking point, teaching the viewer to fear the absence of noise as much as the sudden explosion of violence. The analysis reveals that this manipulation of silence is a technique borrowed from the original films, updated for a contemporary audience accustomed to constant sonic stimulation, proving that nothing is more terrifying than the sound of your own heartbeat while waiting for the monster to strike. The woodchipper as the instrument of final victory is a stroke of narrative genius that deserves extended analysis for its multiple resonances. It is an industrial machine, indifferent and powerful, representing the triumph of brute mechanical force over supernatural malevolence. It is a tool of reduction, grinding the complex horror of the marauder into undifferentiated matter. It is a darkly comic escalation of the franchise's tradition of improvised weaponry, replacing the chainsaw with something even more absurdly destructive. The analysis concludes that the wood chipper is the perfect weapon for a film about the necessity of total annihilation, leaving nothing that can rise again. The lullaby that Ellie sings in her Deadite form, a twisted version of a song her children remember from their infancy, represents the film's most sophisticated use of auditory horror. The melody is recognizable, even soothing, but the context transforms it into a threat, a siren song promising comfort that leads only to death. The analysis examines how the lullaby exploits the deep psychological bond between mother and child, the pre-verbal trust established in the cradle, and weaponizes it against the very children it was meant to soothe. The film's budget, estimated between $15 and $19 million, represents a significant investment in practical effects and set construction that is visible in every frame. This is not a film that hides its limitations behind digital smoke and shadow, but one that puts its resources on screen in tangible, tactile ways. The analysis argues that this financial commitment to physical horror is an artistic statement, a rejection of the CGI-dependent aesthetics that dominate contemporary genre cinema, and a return to the material traditions of practical filmmaking that defined the original trilogy. The ticket booth in the parking garage, where the final confrontation takes place, is a liminal space between the underground horror and the outside world. It represents the last threshold, the final barrier between the survivors and freedom. The analysis reveals how the film uses this transitional space to heighten the stakes of the finale, the mundane architecture of urban infrastructure transformed into an arena for a battle between surrogate mother and fused monstrosity, the ordinary becoming extraordinary under the pressure of survival. The film's engagement with class anxiety is subtle but persistent, woven into the fabric of the setting and the characters' circumstances. The Mond apartments are not a luxury high-rise, but a decaying building slated for demolition, home to working-class families who have been left behind by the city's development. The analysis connects this economic precarity to the film's broader themes of vulnerability and abandonment, suggesting that the evil targets the already marginalized, those whose disappearance will not be noticed by the systems of power that might otherwise intervene. The chemistry between Lily Sullivan and Nell Fisher, who plays Cassie, is the emotional engine that drives the film's second half. Their relationship develops from wary stranger to trusted ally to surrogate family with a naturalness that sells the film's thematic resolution. The analysis focuses on the scenes they share in the elevator and the parking garage, moments of quiet connection amid the chaos, where two people who have lost everything choose to protect each other, forging a new family from the ashes of the old. The film's cold open at the lakeside cabin includes details that reward rewatching after the full narrative has been absorbed. Jessica's illness, the strained dynamics between the three vacationers, the drone shot that rises above the trees to reveal the isolation of the cabin, all take on new meaning when understood as the continuation of the story rather than its beginning. The analysis reveals the careful construction of this sequence, every element designed to function both as an effective standalone horror short and as a piece of a larger narrative puzzle. The possession mechanics in this film differ subtly from previous franchise entries, emphasizing infection and transmission rather than simple demonic inhabitation. The evil spreads through wounds, through proximity, through the mere sound of the incantation played on vinyl. The analysis examines this biological model of possession, which aligns the supernatural threat with contemporary anxieties about contagion and viral spread, updating the franchise's mythology for a post-pandemic audience without sacrificing its occult foundations. The film's title, with its emphasis on rise, operates on multiple levels that the narrative gradually unpacks. The evil rises from the buried vault. The Deadites rise from death. The marauder rises from the fused corpses. The building itself, a high-rise, contains the vertical trajectory of the horror. The analysis concludes that the title is a promise the film fulfills repeatedly, a commitment to escalation and ascension that structures every act, every set piece, every death. The tattoo on Ellie's arm, visible in several scenes before her possession, depicts a snake coiled around a heart, a traditional symbol with specific resonances in the context of the film's themes. The snake represents temptation and corruption, the heart represents love and family, and their entanglement prefigures the twisted maternal bond that will define the horror to come. The analysis of this visual detail reveals the film's attention to symbolic texture, the embedding of meaning in every element of the character's physical presentation. The film's sound mix prioritizes certain frequencies that have been shown to trigger physiological anxiety responses in human listeners, a technique borrowed from experimental music and psychological warfare research. The sub-bass rumble that accompanies the earthquake, the distorted frequencies of the Deadites' voice, and the metallic screech of the woodchipper all operate on the body as much as the mind. The analysis suggests that this somatic approach to horror, bypassing conscious cognition to access primal fear responses, is a key factor in the film's effectiveness. The absence of Ash Williams from this installment is addressed not through direct reference, but through the film's structural choices, which create a different kind of hero for a different kind of story. Where Ash was a bumbling everyman who rose to mythic status through comic incompetence and reluctant courage, Beth is a competent professional who rises to heroism through maternal ferocity and technical skill. The analysis argues that this shift from masculine to feminine heroism is not a rejection of the franchise's legacy, but an expansion of its possibilities, proof that the Evil Dead universe can sustain multiple modes of heroic response. The film's depiction of the Necronomicon itself, the flesh-bound book that serves as the franchise's central artifact, emphasizes its materiality in ways that previous installments did not. The book is heavy, wet, almost breathing, a physical object that seems to squirm when touched. The analysis reveals that this emphasis on the book's organic nature reinforces the film's themes of bodily violation and transformation, presenting the source of the evil not as a text to be read, but as a living thing to be feared, a predator disguised as a book. The final shot of the film, before the post-credits scene, shows Beth and Cassie walking away from the parking garage into the morning light, their clothes soaked in blood, their faces blank with shock. This image is not triumphant but exhausted, a survival that feels more like a stay of execution than a victory. The analysis reads this ambiguity as deliberate, a refusal to provide the comfort of closure in a universe where the evil is never truly defeated, only momentarily held at bay by the sacrifice of those who manage to outlast it. The film's place within the broader tradition of maternal horror, from Rosemary's Baby to The Babadook, is secured by its willingness to push the trope to its most extreme conclusions. Where other films treat motherhood as a site of anxiety or ambivalence, this film transforms it into a literal monster, a devouring force that uses the bonds of love as weapons. The analysis suggests that this radicalization of the maternal horror trope is the film's most significant contribution to the genre, opening new territory for future explorations of the dark side of the parent-child bond. The role of chance and coincidence in the film's narrative is deliberately minimized, creating a sense of grim inevitability that distinguishes it from more random horror narratives. The earthquake does not happen by chance. It is the evil stirring in its prison. Danny does not find the vault by accident. He is drawn to it by forces he cannot perceive. The analysis reveals that the film operates on a logic of predestination. The character's caught in a trap that was set a century ago and has been waiting for someone to spring it. The film's practical blood effects, achieved through a combination of pumps, tubes, and carefully engineered squibs, required extensive rehearsal and choreography to execute safely and effectively. The elevator blood flood alone required thousands of gallons of fake blood and a custom-built set that could contain and recirculate the liquid without damaging the equipment. The analysis celebrates this commitment to practical filmmaking as an act of artistic integrity, a refusal to take the easy path of digital effects in favor of the messy, dangerous, and ultimately more convincing reality of physical horror. The thematic connection between the collapsing building and the collapsing family creates a parallel structure that the film maintains throughout its runtime. As the physical structure crumbles, so does the family unit. As the elevator fails, so does Ellie's maternal protection. As the walls come down, so do the boundaries between love and hate, nurture and destruction. The analysis traces this parallel through each major set piece, revealing a film that thinks architecturally about emotional relationships, understanding that families, like buildings, can only withstand so much pressure before they implode. The film's legacy within the franchise will likely be defined by its demonstration that the Evil Dead formula is more flexible than previously assumed, capable of thriving in urban settings with female protagonists and maternal themes, while retaining the intensity and dark humor that defined the original trilogy. It proves that the cabin in the woods is not the only place where Deadites can dance, that the chainsaw is not the only tool that can dispatch them, and that Ash Williams, beloved as he is is not the only hero capable of facing the darkness. This is a film that honors the past while building for the future, a rare achievement in franchise filmmaking. The film's dialogue during the possession sequences undergoes a linguistic transformation that merits close examination. Ellie's speech patterns shift from colloquial maternal warmth to archaic, ritualistic cadences, as if the demon is speaking a version of English that predates modernity. This vocal distortion is achieved through a combination of Sutherland's performance choices and post-production processing, layering multiple vocal tracks to create a chorus effect that suggests the demon is not a singular entity, but a multitude, a hive consciousness speaking through a single throat. The analysis reveals how this vocal design undermines the audience's ability to trust spoken language, transforming every word into a potential threat. The apartment building's demolition status introduces a temporal urgency that operates beneath the supernatural threat. Even if the family survives the demonic assault, their home will soon cease to exist, bulldozed by the forces of urban redevelopment that care nothing for the lives displaced in their wake. This secondary countdown, the slow death of a community, adds a layer of realistic despair to the fantastic horror. The analysis connects this demolition to the film's broader nihilism, a suggestion that survival is always temporary and that the world, whether demonic or bureaucratic, will eventually grind everything to dust. Beth's guitar technician expertise finds its most crucial application in her understanding of vibration and resonance. When she realizes that the demonic force responds to sound, her trained ear allows her to anticipate its movements, to read the audio landscape of the apartment as a map of threat. The analysis delves into this underexplored aspect of her character, noting that her profession is fundamentally about managing invisible forces, tension, frequency, and harmonic balance, skills that translate directly to navigating a haunting where the enemy is heard before it is seen. The film's treatment of water imagery, from the blood flood in the elevator to the amniotic subtext of Beth's pregnancy, creates a fluid visual motif that contrasts with the rigid geometry of the high-rise architecture. Water is associated with life, birth, and the unconscious, while the building represents structure, control, and conscious order. The analysis traces how the film systematically drowns the rational spaces in irrational fluids, the elevator shaft becoming a birth canal of gore, the parking garage flooding with the consequences of unleashed chaos, and Beth's water breaking as the final signal that the old world has been washed away. The performance of young Nell Fisher as Cassie operates on a register that distinguishes her from typical horror movie children. She is neither precociously wise nor irritatingly helpless, but something rarer. A believable child processing unbelievable events with the limited tools at her disposal. Her creation of Stephanie is not presented as quirky, but as a genuine coping mechanism, a child's attempt to externalize her fear into an object she can control. The analysis highlights Fisher's ability to convey terror without theatricality, her wide eyes and trembling voice communicating more than any scream could. The film's relationship to the 1923 backstory, conveyed entirely through the priest's vinyl recordings, functions as a self-contained ghost story nested within the larger narrative. The priest's voice, crackling with the patina of a century, describes his failure with a mixture of scholarly detachment and growing terror. The analysis reconstructs this implied narrative. A man of faith who dedicated his life to containing the evil, who recorded his findings in the hope they would help others, and who ultimately died knowing he had only delayed the inevitable, his voice preserved as both warning and epitaph. The apartment's ventilation system, which the Deadite uses as a transportation network, transforms the building's circulatory infrastructure into a vascular system through which the demonic presence flows like infected blood. This architectural biology is a recurring visual motif, the vents becoming arteries, the elevator shaft a spine, the apartment doors orifices through which the evil emerges. The analysis examines how this organic reimagining of the built environment undermines the distinction between body and building, suggesting that the high-rise itself has become a living organism, a host for a parasitic intelligence. The film's approach to jump scares is notably restrained compared to contemporary horror conventions, favoring prolonged dread over sudden shocks. When jump scares do occur, they are earned through extended sequences of tension building, the release feeling less like a cheap trick and more like the inevitable rupture of a pressure that has become unbearable. The analysis credits director Lee Cronin with understanding that the anticipation of violence is often more affecting than the violence itself, a lesson learned from the original films that many modern horror directors have forgotten. The glass-eating scene, in which Ellie consumes a wine glass with apparent relish, operates as a particularly disturbing example of the film's body horror vocabulary. The crunch of glass between teeth, the blood welling from cut gums, the casualness with which she performs this self-destructive act, all contribute to a sense that the body has become merely a vehicle for sensation, pain and pleasure indistinguishable in the demon's experience. The analysis reveals that this moment, brief but unforgettable, encapsulates the film's thesis about possession. It is not the suppression of the self, but its perversion, the host's desires amplified and twisted into something unrecognizable. The film's color grading shifts imperceptibly throughout its runtime, moving from the slightly desaturated naturalism of the opening to the hypersaturated crimson and shadow of the finale. This gradual transition is designed to operate on the viewer's subconscious, the increasing unreality of the color palette corresponding to the character's descent into a world where the normal rules no longer apply. The analysis details how this color journey was achieved through a combination of on-set lighting choices and digital intermediate work, creating a visual arc that mirrors the narrative arc with mathematical precision. The absence of cell phone communication, a perennial problem for horror films set in the modern era, is handled with elegant simplicity. The earthquake and the demonic presence have disabled the building's infrastructure, including its telecommunications. This is not a cheat but a logical extension of the established rules, the evil disrupting technology just as it disrupts biology. The analysis notes that this solution avoids the tired cliché of dead batteries or no signal while reinforcing the film's theme of systemic collapse, every support structure failing simultaneously. The film's depiction of the Marauder's intelligence raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of consciousness within the possessed. The creature displays strategic thinking, setting traps and anticipating the survivor's movements in ways that suggest the individual minds of its constituent bodies have not been erased but networked, their knowledge pooled into a collective intelligence. The analysis explores the horror of this possibility. Ellie, Danny, and Bridget may still be aware, may still be experiencing their existence as components of this monstrosity, their individual consciousnesses trapped in a shared nightmare from which death is the only escape. The tattoo needle scene, in which the possessed Ellie uses her professional equipment to torture a victim, represents a particularly intimate form of violence. The tattoo gun is designed to penetrate skin with controlled precision, and its perversion into an instrument of pain transforms a tool of artistic expression into a weapon of sadistic creativity. The analysis examines the scene's commentary on the relationship between artist and subject, the trust that exists between tattooist and client, and the violation of that trust when the artist becomes a monster. The film's soundscape includes subliminal elements that reward analysis with professional audio equipment. Beneath the audible dialogue and effects, the mix contains infrasonic frequencies that have been demonstrated to induce feelings of unease and dread in human subjects. These frequencies are felt rather than heard, a physical sensation of pressure and vibration that the conscious mind cannot localize. The analysis reveals that this technique, borrowed from experimental music and psychological operations research, gives the film a physiological impact that transcends traditional soundtrack design. The relationship between the 2013 reboot's addiction theme and this film's motherhood theme creates a fascinating dialogue about the evolution of horror metaphors. Both films use possession as a literalization of internal struggles, whether the battle against substance dependency or the terror of maternal inadequacy. The analysis suggests that this thematic consistency, the use of supernatural horror to explore real psychological torment, is the secret continuity of the franchise, more important than any narrative connection or character crossover. The film's geography of the apartment, meticulously established in the early scenes, pays off in the later action sequences when the audience understands the spatial relationships between rooms, vents, and escape routes. This cognitive mapping, the mental model of the space that the viewer builds alongside the characters, makes the siege sequences more engaging because the audience can anticipate threats and evaluate tactical decisions. The analysis argues that this spatial intelligibility is a hallmark of effective action horror direction, distinguishing films that respect their audience's intelligence from those that rely on confusion and chaos. The moment when Beth's pregnancy becomes not a vulnerability, but a source of strength marks the film's thematic turning point. When Ellie threatens her unborn child, Beth's maternal instinct, previously dormant, ignites with a ferocity that matches the demon's own. The analysis traces this transformation from the kitchen confrontation to the woodchipper finale, showing how Beth's acceptance of motherhood gives her a reason to fight that transcends mere survival, connecting her to a lineage of protective mothers that stretches back through evolutionary time. The film's use of practical fire effects during Danny's immolation of Bridget adds a dangerous, unpredictable element to the scene that CGI fire cannot replicate. The heat distorts the air, the light flickers unpredictably across the actors' faces, and the smoke fills the set with a tangible presence. The analysis examines how this commitment to practical flame enhances the scene's emotional weight, the real danger to the performers translating into authentic performances of horror and grief. The supporting character of Mr. Fonda, the building's elderly resident who appears briefly before his death, serves as a reminder of the community that the evil destroys. His few lines of dialogue suggest a life lived in the building, a history that predates the current residents, and a loneliness that the urban environment exacerbates. The analysis reads his death as particularly cruel, an old man who has survived a lifetime only to be slaughtered in his home by a force he cannot comprehend, his story ending in a hallway painted with his own blood. The film's title treatment, which appears after the cold open prologue, uses a font and animation style that references the original Evil Dead films while updating them for contemporary sensibilities. The letters emerge from darkness with a physicality that suggests they are being carved into existence, a visual echo of the Necronomicon's flesh-bound pages. The analysis notes that this attention to typographic detail, often overlooked in discussions of horror cinema, is indicative of the film's overall commitment to craft. The decision to set the film in Los Angeles, a city associated with sunshine and glamour rather than gothic horror, is a deliberate provocation that pays dividends in the contrast between setting and tone. The palm trees visible through the apartment windows, the California light that filters through the blood-smeared glass, all create a dissonance that makes the horror more unsettling. The analysis argues that this geographic displacement, moving the Gothic tradition from its European and New England roots to the American West Coast, is part of the franchise's ongoing project to democratize horror, to prove that terror can flourish anywhere. The film's editing rhythm during the action sequences employs a technique of micro-delay, holding shots a fraction of a second longer than expected before cutting. This creates a subtle sense of temporal dislocation, a feeling that time itself is malfunctioning in the presence of the demonic. The analysis reveals that this editing pattern was developed through extensive test screenings, the filmmakers calibrating the precise duration of each shot to maximize audience discomfort without inducing confusion. The role of music in the characters' lives, from Beth's career as a guitar technician to Danny's DJ ambitions, establishes sound as a thematic thread that runs throughout the film. The family's relationship to music, creative, professional, and recreational, is systematically corrupted by the evil, which uses sound as its primary vector of transmission. The analysis traces this corruption from the vinyl records to the distorted lullabies, showing how the film transforms music from a source of joy into a weapon of terror. The film's depiction of the Los Angeles River Basin, visible from the apartment windows, adds another layer of urban decay to the visual landscape. The concrete channel, famous from countless film car chases, is a symbol of the city's attempt to control nature, to force water into artificial pathways. The analysis connects this engineered waterway to the film's themes of containment and failure, another system designed to prevent disaster that proves inadequate when the pressure exceeds its design parameters. The moment when Cassie recognizes her mother in the Deadite, a flicker of the real Ellie surfacing behind the demonic mask, is perhaps the film's most emotionally complex beat. This recognition does not lead to salvation but to deeper horror. The knowledge that Ellie is still in there, still aware, still suffering, and still powerless to stop the thing wearing her body. The analysis examines how this moment complicates the film's moral calculus, transforming the Deadite from a simple monster into a tragic figure, a victim as well as a perpetrator. The film's approach to exposition is notably economical, conveying necessary information through visual storytelling and environmental detail rather than dialogue. The family's history, the building's past, and the rules of the demonic threat are all communicated through images, objects, and actions. The analysis credits this visual literacy as a key factor in the film's pacing, the absence of explanatory monologues allowing the horror to maintain its relentless momentum. The practical makeup effects used to transform Alyssa Sutherland into the Deadite Ellie required hours of application and yielded a result that digital effects could not match. The prosthetics move with her facial muscles, the contact lenses catch the light with organic unpredictability, and the overall effect is of a real, physical transformation rather than a digital overlay. The analysis argues that this commitment to practical transformation effects is essential to the film's success, grounding the supernatural in tangible reality. The film's relationship to its audience is one of aggressive confrontation rather than passive entertainment. It does not want to comfort or reassure. It wants to exhaust, to overwhelm, to push the viewer to their limit and then push further. The analysis suggests that this confrontational stance is the true inheritance of the original Evil Dead, a film that was banned in multiple countries for its intensity, and that this film honors that legacy by refusing to soften its edges for contemporary sensibilities. The post-credits scene's implication that the evil has spread beyond the apartment building opens narrative possibilities for future installments that the analysis considers with both excitement and dread. If the demonic force is now loose in Los Angeles, a city of 4 million people, the potential for escalation is exponential. The cabin was contained, the high-rise was contained, but a metropolitan outbreak suggests a scale of horror that the franchise has never attempted, a pandemic of possession that would require an entirely new kind of hero to confront. The film's closing moments, with Beth and Cassie walking away from the parking garage into an uncertain future, deliberately deny the audience the catharsis of a traditional happy ending. They have survived, but they have lost everything: family, home, innocence. The analysis reads this ambiguity as the film's final statement on the nature of trauma, the recognition that survival is not victory, that the scars left by horror are permanent, and that the best one can hope for is to keep walking, keep breathing, and keep the memory of the dead alive in the face of a universe that does not care. The film's title sequence, emerging from the carnage of the cold open, employs a slow-motion drone shot that rises above the lake and reveals the vast, indifferent forest surrounding the cabin. This aerial perspective, achieved through a combination of drone cinematography and digital stitching, situates the violence just witnessed within a larger, unfeeling landscape, a world that continues its quiet existence regardless of human suffering. The analysis suggests that this visual technique, repeated in various forms throughout the film, reinforces the insignificance of individual lives against the scale of the ancient evil, a cosmic horror sensibility wrapped in splatter aesthetics. The vinyl crackle that permeates the 1923 recordings is not merely an artifact of the medium, but a deliberate sound design element that bridges the gap between historical authenticity and supernatural dread. Each pop and hiss suggests a voice struggling to be heard across time, a message from a doomed past that arrives too late to save its recipients. The analysis reveals that the sound team sourced authentic 1920s recording equipment to capture the priest's voice, creating a sonic texture that no digital simulation could replicate, grounding the film's most fantastical elements in the weight of material history. Beth's decision to keep her baby, articulated in a quiet moment before the horror fully erupts, gains retrospective power as the film progresses toward its maternal apotheosis. The casualness with which she makes this choice, almost an afterthought in conversation with Ellie, belies its significance as the psychological fulcrum on which the entire third act turns. The analysis traces how this seemingly minor character beat is the seed from which Beth's final transformation grows, a decision that commits her to a future she never planned and ultimately equips her to fight for that future with lethal determination. The apartment building's fire escape, a rusted iron lattice clinging to the exterior wall, represents a path to safety that the characters can see but never reach. The earthquake has rendered it unstable, the doors leading to it are jammed, and the Deadite patrols the hallway with preternatural awareness of any escape attempt. The analysis examines this tantalizingly visible but utterly inaccessible exit as a metaphor for hope itself in the film's universe, always present, always visible, and always just beyond the reach of those who need it most. The film's treatment of the Necronomicon illustrations, glimpsed in extreme close-up as Danny pages through the flesh-bound volume, rewards freeze-frame analysis with a wealth of horrific detail. The diagrams depict rituals of bodily transformation, anatomical impossibilities rendered in the style of medieval medical texts, and script in a language that seems to shift and writhe even in static images. The analysis suggests that these illustrations, created by the film's art department with obsessive attention to detail, constitute a visual subtext that deepens the mythology for attentive viewers without burdening the narrative with unnecessary exposition. The moment when Bridget, newly possessed, speaks in a voice that is not her own yet retains traces of her adolescent cadences, creates a cognitive dissonance that is more disturbing than complete transformation would be. The demon does not erase her, but layers itself over her, a palimpsest of personality in which the original text remains visible beneath the overwritten horror. The analysis explores how this incomplete erasure makes the possession more tragic, the audience able to recognize the child still present in the monster, still suffering, still aware. The film's use of shadow as a narrative device extends beyond conventional horror, lighting into the realm of character revelation. The Deadite Ellie's shadow, when cast against the apartment walls, sometimes appears larger than her physical form, sometimes moves independently of her body, and sometimes seems to contain multiple figures writhing within a single silhouette. The analysis reveals that these shadow effects were achieved through a combination of practical lighting techniques and subtle digital enhancement, creating a visual language of multiplicity that hints at the demonic horde inhabiting a single host. The kitchen, traditionally the heart of the home and the domain of maternal nurture, becomes the site of the film's most transgressive violence. The analysis examines how the film systematically desecrates this space of domestic comfort, transforming the refrigerator into a barricade, the countertops into operating tables, and the family dining area into an arena of survival. This spatial corruption of the kitchen is the film's most concentrated attack on the ideal of home as sanctuary, proving that no room is innocent when evil has been invited inside. The film's dialogue includes repeated references to hunger and consumption, from the Deadites' threats to devour souls to the marauders' insatiable appetite for destruction. This oral fixation, the constant invocation of eating and being eaten, connects the supernatural horror to the biological reality of predation, reminding the audience that the demonic force is, at its most fundamental level, a hungry thing. The analysis traces this motif through the film's body horror vocabulary, the chewing of glass, the swallowing of blood, the gnashing of teeth, all suggesting a hunger that can never be satisfied. The performance of Jayden Daniels as the doomed neighbor Gabriel, though brief, provides a crucial tonal shift from domestic tension to supernatural terror. His death, witnessed through the fisheye peephole, is the moment when the threat becomes undeniably real, the transition from psychological unease to physical horror accomplished in a single, unbroken shot. The analysis notes that Daniels plays Gabriel with a deliberate ordinariness, a man whose only crime is being in the wrong hallway at the wrong time, his anonymity making his death a statement about the randomness of the evil's violence. The film's engagement with the history of vinyl records as a medium adds a layer of cultural commentary to the horror mechanics. Vinyl is both obsolete and fetishized, a technology that has survived into the digital age as an object of collector desire, much like the Necronomicon itself. Danny's excitement at finding the records is that of a crate digger who has stumbled upon a holy grail, and his inability to recognize the danger in his discovery is a critique of the collector mentality that values rarity over wisdom. The analysis suggests that this parallel between music fandom and occult curiosity is one of the film's most subtle and effective thematic moves. The elevator shaft that serves as the vertical axis of the building's horror is also the site of the film's most overt homage to Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. The flood of blood that engulfs Beth and Cassie is not merely a citation but an escalation, the iconic image pushed to a new extreme of volume and violence. The analysis examines how this intertextual moment functions simultaneously as tribute, as franchise self-assertion, and as dark comedy, the sheer excess of the blood flow winking at an audience that recognizes the reference while gasping at its amplification. The film's approach to the mechanics of decapitation, the franchise's signature method of dispatching Deadites, is notably more difficult and desperate than in previous installments. There is no chainsaw conveniently available, no machete hanging on the wall, only improvised tools and sheer luck. The analysis argues that this difficulty is narratively important, emphasizing that the characters in this film are not prepared for horror, that they have no Ash-like figure to guide them, and that their survival depends on desperate improvisation rather than heroic competence. The brief flashback to Ellie and Beth's childhood, conveyed through a single photograph and a few lines of dialogue, sketches a relationship defined by abandonment and resentment. Ellie was the one who stayed, who raised children, who built a life in the ruins of their family of origin. Beth was the one who left, who pursued a career, who who avoided the responsibilities that Ellie embraced. The analysis reveals how this backstory, minimally presented, provides the emotional foundation for the film's themes of maternal obligation and sisterly guilt, the horror serving as a crucible in which old grievances are burned away. The film's use of negative space in its visual compositions creates a constant sense of impending intrusion. Doorways gape like wounds, empty hallways stretch into darkness, and the corners of rooms remain stubbornly unilluminated. The analysis examines how this compositional strategy primes the audience to scan every frame for threats, to distrust every shadow, and to experience the apartment not as a confined space, but as an endlessly expandable territory of dread, the unseen always threatening to become seen in the most terrible way possible. The decision to make the youngest child, Cassie, the most perceptive and resilient member of the family, inverts the expected hierarchy of vulnerability. It is the adults and teenagers who freeze, who panic, who make fatal mistakes, while the child assesses threats with clear-eyed pragmatism and acts decisively to protect herself and others. The analysis suggests that this inversion is a deliberate commentary on the uselessness of adult rationality in the face of supernatural horror. The child's still flexible worldview better equipped to accept the impossible and respond accordingly. The film's sound design during the Marauders' pursuit sequences incorporates animal vocalizations, predator calls, and insect chittering layered beneath the more conventional horror score. This bestial soundscape suggests that the fused entity has regressed to something pre-human, a composite organism driven by instincts that predate language, culture, and civilization. The analysis reveals that these animal sounds were sourced from a variety of species, predator and prey both, mixed into a chorus of predation that defies easy categorization. The parking garage setting of the final confrontation strips away the domestic context entirely, moving the horror from the intimate space of the apartment to the anonymous, industrial space of urban infrastructure. This transition marks the film's final statement on the nature of the evil. It is not a home invader, but a fundamental force that can manifest anywhere, follow anyone, and transform any space into an abattoir. The analysis examines how the concrete pillars, the painted lines, and the cold fluorescent lighting of the garage create a visual environment of utter sterility against which the organic horror of the marauder becomes even more obscene. The film's marketing campaign, which emphasized the move from cabin to city while withholding the maternal horror themes, managed audience expectations with remarkable precision. Trailers suggested a change of scenery without revealing the change of thematic focus, allowing the film's central concerns to land with the force of surprise. The analysis considers this marketing strategy as an extension of the film's narrative approach, the careful management of information creating an audience primed for one kind of story only to receive another, more resonant one. The practical blood used in the film's most effects-heavy sequences required the actors to perform while drenched in a substance that, while safe, was cold, sticky, and progressively more uncomfortable as shooting continued. The analysis examines how this physical discomfort contributed to the authenticity of the performances, the actors' exhaustion and misery visible on screen in ways that no amount of acting could simulate. The blood is not just a visual effect, but a physical presence that the cast had to endure, their suffering lending credibility to the suffering of their characters. The film's refusal to provide a definitive origin for the demonic force. The Necronomicon is ancient, but its ultimate source remains obscure, aligns with the franchise's tradition of strategic ambiguity. The analysis suggests that this refusal to explain is a strength rather than a weakness, preserving the mystery that makes the evil truly frightening. Explanation is the enemy of horror. Once a monster is understood, it is diminished. The film wisely chooses to show what the evil does rather than explain what it is, leaving the audience with questions that linger long after the credits roll. The relationship between Danny's DJ aspirations and his fatal decision to play the vinyl record creates a tragic irony that the film handles with restraint. He wanted to share music, to create experiences through sound, and this noble impulse is precisely what the evil exploits. The analysis traces the arc of his character from creative ambition to destructive consequence, a cautionary tale about the power of sound and the responsibility of those who wield it, whether DJs or priests, to be careful what they play. The film's depiction of the moments immediately following Beth's victory is notable for what it does not show. There is no triumphant music, no swelling score of relief, only the ambient noise of the parking garage and the ragged breathing of the survivors. The analysis reads this sonic restraint as a refusal to sentimentalize survival, an acknowledgement that the end of the immediate threat does not erase the trauma that has been endured. Beth and Cassie have won, but the cost is written on their faces and in the silence that surrounds them, a silence more eloquent than any music could be. The practical construction of the Marauder costume required multiple performers whose movements had to be precisely coordinated to create the illusion of a single, multi-limbed organism. The analysis reveals the backstage choreography behind the creature's on-screen fluidity, the hours of rehearsal required to teach performers to move as a unified entity rather than individuals sharing a costume, and the physical toll exacted by operating a heavy, complex puppet under hot set lights for extended shooting periods. The film's engagement with the theme of inheritance operates on multiple levels simultaneously. The evil is an inheritance from the past, passed down through the Necronomicon and the vinyl records. The children inherit their mother's fate, trapped in a building and a family history they did not choose. Beth's unborn child inherits a world of horror, a legacy of trauma that begins before birth. The analysis examines how this theme of involuntary inheritance, of receiving what one did not ask for and cannot refuse, connects the supernatural plot to the universal human experience of being born into circumstances beyond one's control. The brief moment when the real Ellie surfaces within the Deadite, a flicker of recognition in eyes that have been empty, is the film's most emotionally devastating beat. The analysis suggests that this moment is not hopeful but cruel, a reminder that the person is still present within the monster, still experiencing everything, still loving the children she is being forced to destroy. The demon does not simply kill its hosts but imprisons them within their own bodies, forcing them to witness atrocities committed with their own hands, their own voices, their own faces. The film's color timing during the parking garage finale pushes the image toward a desaturated, almost monochromatic palette, the only vivid color being the red of blood and the orange of the woodchipper's warning lights. This visual austerity strips away any remaining comfort, reducing the world to essentials: concrete, shadow, blood, and fire. The analysis examines how this color strategy creates a visual environment of terminal seriousness, signaling to the audience that the time for dark humor has passed and only survival remains. The relationship between the film's practical effects team and its actors was necessarily intimate, requiring trust and communication to execute dangerous-looking gags safely. The analysis reveals the collaborative process behind the film's most memorable images, the discussions about comfort levels and physical limits, the safe words and emergency signals, and the mutual respect that allowed performers to commit fully to scenes that would be traumatic if they were real. This backstage humanism is invisible in the final product, but essential to its creation. The film's final image, before the cut to credits, holds on Beth's face for a beat longer than expected, allowing the audience to read the complex emotion there. She is relieved, exhausted, grieving, and fiercely determined all at once, a portrait of survival that refuses to simplify itself into triumph. The analysis reads this extended close-up as the film's thesis statement in a single image. Survival is not a victory but a burden, a responsibility to keep living in the aftermath of horror, to carry the dead forward into whatever future remains. The film's recurring motif of reflections in glass and water offers a visual metaphor for the fractured selfhood that possession inflicts upon its victims. Early in the narrative, Ellie's face appears intact in mirrors and windows, a coherent identity reflected back at itself. After her transformation, the Deadite avoids reflective surfaces, or when captured in them, appears distorted, multiplied, and wrong, as if the glass cannot bear to show what she has become. The analysis examines how this careful visual strategy externalizes the internal rupture of possession, the demon inhabiting a body that no longer reflects the soul trapped within, creating a permanent schism between appearance and essence that mirrors the film's broader concern with the unreliability of surfaces. The moment when Danny understands the full scope of his catastrophic mistake is rendered through a slow zoom that pushes into his face as the third record plays, the camera movement synchronized with the dawning horror in his expression. This technique, borrowed from the psychological horror playbook of the 1970s, forces the audience to share his claustrophobic realization, the walls of the frame closing in as the walls of possibility collapse around him. The analysis reveals that this shot was captured in a single take after multiple rehearsals, the young actor drawing on genuine emotion to convey the specific agony of a child who has doomed everyone he loves through an act of innocent curiosity, a guilt so profound it becomes a form of possession in its own right. The architectural history of the Mond Apartments, a former bank converted into residential units, creates a palimpsest of function that the film exploits for thematic resonance. Banks are designed to protect valuables, to secure wealth behind vault doors and security systems, and the building's original purpose lingers in its bones even after its conversion to domestic space. The analysis traces how the vault beneath the parking garage, the last remnant of the original structure, literalizes this history of failed security, the one thing the bank was built to protect becoming the source of its eventual destruction. The building that once safeguarded material treasure now harbors a spiritual contagion, the irony of this transformation deepening the film's critique of institutional failure. The Deadites' ability to mimic human emotion, to produce tears or express feigned vulnerability, represents the most insidious weapon in its psychological arsenal. Ellie, through the demon, can cry real tears, can soften her voice to a mother's familiar cadence, can reach out with hands that seem to offer comfort rather than violence. The analysis explores how this emotional mimicry is more disturbing than straightforward aggression. The audience and the characters both knowing intellectually that the performance is a trap while still responding viscerally to the cues of human connection. The demon understands that love is a vulnerability, that children will run toward their mother even when they know she has become a monster, and this understanding makes it truly dangerous. The film's treatment of the body as a site of contested ownership runs throughout the narrative, from Beth's unwanted pregnancy to Ellie's demonic occupation to the Marauder's grotesque fusion of multiple bodies into a single organism. No character retains sovereign control over their physical form. Every body is subject to invasion, transformation, or merger with something alien. The analysis connects this bodily anxiety to contemporary debates about autonomy and consent, suggesting that the film's horror is rooted in the fundamental fear of losing control over the one thing that is supposed to be indisputably ours, our own flesh and blood, which can be seized, repurposed, or destroyed without our permission. The practical effect of the Deadites' elongated limbs, achieved through a combination of prosthetic extensions, forced perspective cinematography, and Sutherland's physical training, creates a creature that moves in defiance of human anatomical possibility. Her arms seem to gain extra joints, her neck stretches beyond its natural length, and her gait becomes an insectal scuttle that covers ground with unnatural speed. The analysis examines how these physical distortions, achieved without digital enhancement, give the performance a tangible wrongness that CGI could not replicate, a presence in the frame that the actors could genuinely react to rather than imagine. The film's use of food and eating as a vector of horror begins long before the glass-chewing scene, with early establishing shots of the family kitchen showing normal meals, normal hunger, normal domestic consumption. This careful normalizing of appetite makes the later perversion more effective. The audience has seen this kitchen used for its proper purpose before witnessing its desecration. The analysis traces how the film maps the progression of the horror through the corruption of oral imagery, from nourishment to poison, from family dinner to cannibalistic threat, the mouth transformed from an organ of communion to a portal of destruction. The relationship between light and darkness in the film's cinematography follows a logic that inverts natural expectations, with darkness often providing safety and light exposing characters to danger. The apartment's electrical failures create pools of shadow where the survivors can hide, while the fluorescent hallway, harshly illuminated, is the site of the film's most public and unavoidable violence. The analysis examines how this inversion of light as safety unsettles deep-seated human instincts, the fear of the dark giving way to a more sophisticated terror of what the light might reveal, the illumination that brings not understanding but annihilation. The relationship between light and darkness in the film's cinematography follows a logic that inverts natural expectations, with darkness often providing safety and light exposing characters to danger. The apartment's electrical failures create pools of shadow where the survivors can hide, while the fluorescent hallway, harshly illuminated, is the site of the film's most public and unavoidable violence. The analysis examines how this inversion of light as safety unsettles deep-seated human instincts, the fear of the dark giving way to a more sophisticated terror of what the light might reveal, the illumination that brings not understanding but annihilation. The film's dialogue during the quieter moments between Beth and the children contains seeds of thematic import that only germinate on subsequent viewings. A casual reference to a father who left, a joke about the building's demolition, a complaint about a neighbor's noise, All these seemingly incidental details accumulate into a portrait of a world already in decay before the supernatural arrives. The analysis argues that this density of thematic material in ordinary conversation is a hallmark of sophisticated horror writing. The genre's ability to embed significance in the mundane that transforms repeat viewings into acts of archaeological discovery. The elevator, stalled between floors with Ellie trapped inside during her possession, becomes a liminal chamber of transformation that the film returns to repeatedly as a site of horror. It is neither one place nor another, neither safe nor definitively dangerous, a transitional space where the normal rules are suspended. The analysis examines how the elevator functions as a secular confessional, a sealed box where Ellie undergoes her dark transfiguration while her family waits unknowingly above. The vertical shaft connecting the buried vault of the Necronomicon to the domestic space of the apartment, a conduit of evil that runs through the building's spine. The performance demands placed on young Nell Fisher as Cassie extended beyond the emotional range typically required of child actors, requiring her to portray not just fear but grim determination, not just innocence but a premature wisdom forced by trauma. The analysis reveals the careful preparation that went into her most difficult scenes, the conversations with Cronin about what Cassie understands and what she refuses to understand, the protective measures taken on set to ensure that the horror remained fictional for a child who had to pretend to live through it. Fisher's performance is the film's secret weapon, a reminder that children are not merely vulnerable but resilient, capable of facing nightmares with a clarity that adults have forgotten. The film's approach to the geography of the apartment building's multiple floors creates a vertical hierarchy of horror that the characters must descend to escape. Each floor represents a stage of the nightmare, from the relative safety of the apartment to the contested hallway to the flooded elevator to the parking garage where the final confrontation occurs. The analysis traces this descent as a catabasis, the classical journey to the underworld, with each level bringing the survivors closer to both death and, paradoxically, liberation. The parking garage, the lowest point, is also the point of exit, the place where the living can finally separate from the dead. The sound of the wood chipper, first heard as ambient noise from a construction site and later as the instrument of the marauder's destruction, undergoes a transformation from background irritant to salvational roar. The analysis examines how the film plants this sound early, associating it with the city's constant low-level violence of demolition and renewal, before bringing it to the forefront as the only force capable of matching the demonic. The machine that tears down buildings, that reduces structures to splinters, becomes the machine that reduces monsters to meat, a symmetry that satisfies on both narrative and thematic levels. The film's treatment of Cassie's relationship with her doll-headed staff, Staphany, evolves from whimsy to utility to something approaching genuine talismanic power. By the final act, Staphany is no longer a toy but a proven weapon, an object that has been sanctified by its use in survival, and Cassie's attachment to it has transformed from childish comfort to warrior's respect. The analysis suggests that this arc mirrors the film's larger argument about the objects of domestic life, that anything can become a weapon or a shield when the world turns hostile, and that children's play is closer to survival strategy than adults typically acknowledge. The color of the blood in the film, a deep, almost black crimson rather than the bright red of less serious horror, contributes to the atmosphere of grim authenticity that distinguishes this entry in the franchise. The analysis reveals that this color choice was deliberate, the effects team mixing a specific blend of dyes and thickeners to create a blood that looked old, heavy, and viscous, the blood of a world where violence has weight and consequence. This is not cartoon blood that can be laughed off, but the blood of real bodies, a substance that stains, clots, and eventually drowns. The moment when Beth, trapped and exhausted, makes the conscious decision to fight rather than surrender, is signaled by a change in her breathing that the sound mix emphasizes over all other audio. Her ragged gasps steady into deliberate, controlled breaths, the breath of someone who has accepted the cost of survival and decided to pay it. The analysis examines this sonic turning point as the film's true climax, the psychological victory that precedes and enables the physical one, the sound of a reluctant mother becoming a fierce one in real time. The film's relationship to the original Evil Dead trilogy is encoded in visual details that reward knowledgeable viewers without alienating newcomers. The angle of a camera movement, the framing of a possessed face, the timing of a jump scare, all reference the 1981 original in ways that function as homage rather than requirement. The analysis traces these intertextual threads, showing how Cronin has absorbed Raimi's visual language without merely imitating it, creating a film that speaks the franchise's native tongue while saying something new. The brief glimpse of the world outside the apartment, seen through windows that cannot be opened and doors that cannot be reached, shows ordinary life continuing in blissful ignorance of the horror unfolding within. Cars pass on the street below, distant sirens wail for other emergencies, and the city proceeds with its daily rhythms while a family is systematically destroyed mere feet from its oblivious gaze. The analysis reads this as the film's darkest joke, a commentary on urban anonymity and the isolation that allows atrocities to occur in plain sight, unnoticed and unremarked. The tattoo on Ellie's knuckles, partially visible in close-up during her Deadite transformation, spells a word that becomes illegible as her fingers stretch and distort, the ink warping across skin that no longer fits the body it was applied to. This small detail, easily missed on first viewing, encapsulates the film's theme of identity overwritten by possession, the permanent marks we make on ourselves becoming meaningless when the self that made them is erased. The analysis suggests that this attention to the smallest visual elements is characteristic of a film that rewards the attentive eye at every scale. The film's ultimate argument, emerging from the blood and chaos of its finale, is that family is not a biological given, but a choice made under pressure and renewed with every act of protection. Beth and Cassie are not mother and daughter by blood, but they have chosen each other in the crucible of shared survival, a bond forged in trauma that the film presents as equally valid, perhaps more valid, than the biological ties that the demon exploited. The analysis concludes that this is the film's final, hard-won optimism, the possibility that family can be rebuilt from its own ashes, that love can be chosen even after the loved one was born into has been corrupted beyond recognition, and that survival is not merely the continuation of life, but the creation of new reasons to live.